Hi, everybody who's joining us today. Well, thanks for coming to our webinar. We're trying to make this a regular thing to go through Sage Intacct release notes and where we can, we maybe pull in another topic that we think is relevant to the customer base and highlight some different developments. And so today we're going to go over the release 2 notes, talk about some things that are hidden intact that as they do their quarterly releases. And we always like to highlight we have a pretty diverse customer base, and so as we're going through the notes here, some of these may apply to you and sound super awesome, and some of these you may be scratching your head about why we're talking about it. But just know that we have quite a few different people on the phone that we're trying to kind of talk about kind of things that are relevant to them. And then we're kind of excited too to add on to this discussion uh, a discussion about banking automation, bank feeds, maybe to some extent bank payments. But I think looking across our customers and talking with some of them over the last couple of quarters, we've realized that everybody's in a little bit of a different spot depending on when they were implemented and what the functionality of the banking feeds and banking automations were at the time. And so we just want to go through, reset a little bit, highlight you know some people may be in great shape and are taking advantage of everything, and some people maybe there's some things we can kind of turn on here and make your Intact experience better. So we just want to kind of highlight those things and bubble those up, and then we can circle back if you want to reach out. So that kind of sets the table. I think just quick introductions for everybody. For anybody who doesn't know who we are, I'm David Lear, founder of Madken Advisors. We're based here in Fort Worth, and we focus on finance implementations, back office optimization, things of that nature. And with me is Lane Johnson, who many of you know, who supports our Sage Intacct implementation and support side of the business. And so he's going to lead the presentation today, talk through start with R2 and then get into some bank feeds and bank automations. And so with that, I'll throw it to Lane and we'll get started.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave.
One more thing. If
Sure.
anybody has any questions, throw them into the Q&A or into the chat. We'll be monitoring that as we go, and we will address those. So we should have time for all that. So sorry about that, Lane. Sorry for the false start.
Nice.
Now we'll throw it to you for real.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks everybody. So, we're going to go through R2 first, and then jump into, the bank transactions like Dave mentioned. So, the first thing I want to call out, the release notes are always helpful, right? So I encourage everybody, like I'm always get really excited when I see the release notes drop on kind of the Intact homepage. So, I encourage you to go through that. But I think the goal today is we're not just going to kind of read through feature announcements. Hopefully, we're going to translate, these into some, more practical finance improvements and kind of more actionable items. And so first thing we want to talk through was, this was a highly requested feature. So, not sure if everybody on the call is familiar with ideas on the Sage Intacct community. So, if you've got a feature that you think you would be great to add to Intacct, you can go post an idea. This is, one of a couple examples this round where, customer ideas got turned into updates in a release. And so this first one is really practical, right? It's processing customer refunds through accounts payable. And so historically, when you had a customer refund, this was really like a process control challenge. So the refund is going to originate in AR because it starts with the customer credit. But the actual cash disbursement is usually managed by your accounts payable or your treasury team. So it was just a really disconnected process that led to workarounds, sidetracking, emails offline, Excel, manual checks, and just uncertainty around, if the refund has been processed. And so with this release, Sage is connecting AR and AP, both those workflows directly. And so now an AR user can create a customer refund and and Intacct's going to generate a linked AP bill to process that payment. And then, from the AP side, it's using their normal workflow to issue that payment. And so it's a way to separate the refund creation from the payment processing, while keeping that refund, the bill, and the payment all linked together. So there's lots of great visibility. And so I think one of the big values here is, segregation of duties. So AR can own that customer credit, but AP is going to own that cash disbursement, right? And get that money out the door and back to the customer. So when you look at this feature, don't think of it as just a new refund button that is kind of there. Think of it as a way to bring customer refunds into a more controlled procure to pay process. And so, if we go to the next slide, the next question is, how does Intacct know who to pay? And so this is where the customer refund setup comes in. We're happy to help you with this if you want to turn this on. And so on the customer record, there's going to be a new refunds tab where you can set up the customer to use a specific vendor, or you can have Intacct auto generate the vendor as needed. And so, this matters because once the refund activity exists, Intacct, needs to preserve this linkage. So it's really important if you're using that auto-generated vendor, that there's not an existing vendor set up for that customer if they've had a refund in the past. So that's just one gotcha on the setup here to be mindful for. And so I guess before turning this on broadly, you want to review your customers and see if there are vendors set up, and go ahead and do that linkage between the customer and the vendor before you turn on this auto generate functionality. So as we go to the next slide, this is just a little visibility into, adding a refund. And so once you've got that setup complete, the actual refund workflow starts in AR. So, you're going to go to the refund process. That's going to be a new menu item. You're going to select a customer and create this refund. And then as soon as you create that, there's going to be the ability to kind of process that in accounts payable. And then after that, the refund will be available in AP to move that cash. And so, maybe a clean way to explain it is AR identifies the credit and creates the refund. Intacct's going to create the AP bill. AP pays the bill, and then the refund, the bill, and the payment are all going to be linked together. And I think that linkage is really important for all the teams here. And so it makes it easier to answer questions along the way. Was the refund created? Was the bill generated? Has it been paid? What the payment included? Who processed it? And so I think for those of you who are having to do customer refunds, this is a really big win along the way. So moving into the next update, this is really relevant for our clients who have a multi-currency in play across base currency and transaction currency. And so it's maybe not as practical as the refund example, but for those of you on currency, I think this is a very important update, and really shows that Sage is focused on improving their multi-currency processing. And so this update is really focused on updating views and reports, payment-related pages, posted payments, advances, your ledgers, your registers, your statements, and even custom reports. And so Intacct is going to make the distinction clearer between three things: the bank currency, the transaction currency, and the base currency. And this really matters because in multi-currency processing and posting, those three questions come up a lot, like, what currency is the bank account in? What currency is the invoice or the transaction in? And what's your base currency? And so it can get really complicated really quickly. And so when those fields aren't clearly separated, it can be hard for you as a user to know and follow the money trail. And so, this release is really laying the groundwork for future multi-currency improvements as well. But even now, it helps users see, what amounts belongs to the bank account, what amounts and currencies belong to the transaction, and what amounts belong to the entity's operating currency. And so here's a great example on the posted payments page, and even the posted payments reporting. I think the impact is pretty clear. You'll see separate fields now for bank currency, bank amount, transaction amount, base currency, and bank amount. And so, Sage is defining the bank currency as the currency of the bank, which I think makes sense. And then the transaction currency, I think we all understand, and then the base currency is set up at the entity level. And so accounts payable, similar updates. It's improving the distinction between currencies and amounts, when all three currencies are involved. And so, again, bank currency, bank transaction currency, base currency is going to very clearly be displayed. And so if we go to that next slide, I think we'll see a screenshot of that AP. So here you can see a payment request with all three currencies potentially involved, which wasn't possible before. And so this, as we kind of keep going through the screenshots, this is going to apply to the void payment page, the ledgers and registers, and then any custom reports, you'll be able to pull these fields in as well. So I think, if you have transaction currency in play or base currency in play, reach out. Let's talk about how this can help improve your processes, because I know this has come up in several of our implementations when multi-currency is involved across, not only transaction currency and base currency. So next is just a quick update on the role permission report. As an implementer, I was really excited to finally see this. So as an administrator, or your auditors are going to really like this. And so historically, you couldn't kind of run a report to show, the permissions for a given role. You could do that on a user level. But there's a new role permissions report where you can pick that role name and then view the permissions. And so, when an auditor, you as an administrator or setting up a new user, want to see, hey, what does this role give me? I can go look at this specific role and see exactly what that does. So you can use this for role validation. If you're just coming out of your implementation, this is a great time to go look at your roles, make sure you understand those, and they look nice and clean for go forward. And then just security reviews and periodic reviews, right? Like, I think we encourage everybody to, look at your user access, periodically, and we're happy to kind of sit down and do that with you as well, and go over like key controls in the system. And so again, go out there, run this report for your key roles, make sure that your permissions are still correct and make sense, and then, clean up. And if you have any questions, reach out and we'll help you with that. So moving on into fixed assets, the new split asset feature is designed for where you might have one asset that becomes multiple assets over time after it's already been created. Sage says you can split an existing asset in up to 20 new assets. Not sure the use case for that, but it will preserve the depreciation accuracy and the history along the way. And maybe a simple example of that is a server. So maybe the purchase was originally recorded as a single asset, but later the components need to be tracked and depreciated separately. And maybe another example is, instead of identical desks, maybe 10 desks were originally recorded, but now you need to split 3 of those off for some reason. And so previously that wasn't possible, and you had to do a lot of manual workarounds. You might need to do adjustments to disposals, new assets, or just manual tracking offline, which we don't love. So with this enhancement, the fixed asset module can split those assets, allocate the values while maintaining a relationship between that original asset and the new assets created. So I think this is the important finance point, that this gives you a control way to handle, I think, probably a real world scenario that some of you have encountered. So just moving on, the process is really
Lane, can I,
straightforward.
hey, real
Yeah,
quick, Lane, can I jump in?
sure.
So,
Yeah.
is there a distinction here between kind of the old fixed asset module and I'm guessing this is the newer fixed asset module?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, and I think we kind of, if you were on our R1 call, um, if you are still kind of running the legacy, uh, what they call the SIG fixed assets, and haven't upgraded to the new fixed asset module, please reach out there. There is an upgrade path that doesn't require much work from your side. And so, yeah, that's a great point, Dave. This is all within the new fixed asset module. If you don't know if you're running the old fixed asset module, please reach out. We can help you figure that out. And if you are, we'd love to kind of upgrade you to the new fixed asset module. Eventually, the old fixed asset module is going to deprecate and you'll be forced onto the new fixed asset one. But it's a very easy upgrade process. We just have to log a support ticket on your behalf, and it's pretty seamless. So, yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Dave.
All right.
So maybe I'll oh, this is sorry. So this is the next example of an update that came from customer feedback, those ideas on the community. And so previously, when you created a manual transaction from that bank feed, you're going in there and creating a JE or a manual payment or an other receipt. The date defaulted to the current date, and defaults are always dangerous because people don't review them and just flow through them. And so now, when you create that additional transaction, from the bank feed, it's going to make you specify that transaction date, and prevent you from just getting defaulted to today's date, because oftentimes it's a few weeks out, you're creating that manual transaction, it's defaulting to today, you don't notice it, and now you're having to go back and do a bunch of
Mhm.
reclasses or reversals. And so I don't know, I think this sounds small, but anyone who's like created a bunch of bank transactions on the wrong date and had to go back and clean them up, I think this is a big win. And so um, I think this is just another area where
Mhm.
kind of Sage is, just making that a better user experience and kind of putting, some more safeguards in place, to keep you from having that rework in the future. So maybe I'll pause here. I think that was kind of the big hits from this release. The last release was one of the best releases I've seen in a long time. So, I think every release isn't a home run. So there was a few good tidbits here. But Dave, do we have any kind of questions on that before we talk real quick about the finance intelligent agent and then move on to bank transactions?
Nope, nothing's come in so far. So I think we can keep moving forward.
Okay. So, the finance intelligent agent, we covered this on our webinar on AI. This is, the Sage answer to allow you to ask questions, get insights, and explore financial information within Sage Intacct using natural language. So it's intended to retrieve, aggregate data, identify trends, but also really importantly, explain the why behind the answer. And so I think why this matters, finance teams are spending a lot of time moving between reports, dashboards, exports, and just looking at transactions. And so this natural language interface that we're all familiar now with Claude, Chat GPT, has really a potential to reduce a lot of that. And so uh, this is something that I think is very important to Sage. And so while this isn't going to eliminate, you know, strong reporting for month end, good data quality, clean dimensions. It's going to be really useful. And just to point out, users will still need to have permissions to ask questions about things. So if you don't have AP permissions, you won't be able to ask questions about AP bills. And so while we're really excited about this, and we kind of go to this next slide, this is being phased out in an early adopter program. And so what we want you all to do is be on the lookout for in product messages to join this program. And so you're going to get a welcome message when that happens, letting you know that the administrator of your Intacct instance can turn that on, and then permission that out to your users. And so um, this is rolling out, I believe, over the next 3 to 4 months, and it's free until 2027. And so in 2027, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen in June. We're being told it's going to kind of be a token-based plan, but there'll also be a free plan as well. So, it's free for at least a year. So we're encouraging everybody, be on the lookout for that message. And when you get it, reach out to us and we'll help you turn that on and roll that out to the team. And you can give it a try. And so we're really excited to kind of finally get this in our customers' hands. Okay, so moving to the banking automation piece. Um, so like Dave mentioned, we see our lots of our client base in different places here. And so this is one of the best areas where you can improve your close because it's going to touch data entry, matching, reconciliation, cash visibility, as well as even customer payments, as we'll see at the end with those new customer assignment rules. And so at a high level, there are several ways to get these bank transactions into the system. File import standard, or what we call indirect connections. Then we've got these direct or more premium connections, and then the custom connections. And so these feeds are a connection between Intacct and your bank, where Intact's going to receive those transactions in and automatically match them and use them for reconciliation or even create entries on your behalf. And so if we move on to the file import, so this is the simplest and least automated. We call this the caveman approach. And really, we hope this is kind of your last resort. Maybe if you've got some very low volume accounts that, it's prohibitive to connect for some reason, this might be a good example. But it's free. And the good news is it supports lots of different file types. And so, many of you can get these files just straight out of your bank portal and download them and import them without any formatting change. And then once the bank transactions are in, via that, bank transaction assist import, the native Intacct rules, create rules, matching rules, customer assignment rules take over, which we'll see in a second. So it's not useless. It's got its use cases, but we hope we can do a little better there. So moving to the standard connections, and these are also really indirect connection because they're relying on a third-party aggregator or some sort of scraping technology like Plaid. A bunch of you might have heard of that. So there's no feeds. The biggest downfall is it only works with banks that don't require, tokens or multi-factor upon login. And then the other downside is, there's really not much control and more inconsistency. You're beholden to Plaid, and so if the connection breaks, we're happy to try to work with support, but many times, Intacct will reach out to Plaid and they just say, well, this connection's broken and it's not going to be fixed. So while it's got its use cases and when it works great, but just know it could break tomorrow and it might not be fixed. So moving into the direct connections, Um, these are really where the future of, I think bank integrations are, even on the feeds in and the payments out. And so these are connections that you establish with your bank via their API or an SFTP. Um, some banks might have a fee. And so it really varies bank to bank, your relationship with the bank, and then who the connection provider is. There's several connection providers in the ecosystem that can help you set up these direct connection. And the good news is it does work with tokens and key fobs. It's very reliable because it's, a back-end connection. And so, the three main examples are FiSpan. We love FiSpan. We're a partner of them. Access Pay and Bank of America Cash Pro all have direct connections into Intacct. And so moving on to a little bit more about FiSpan and Access Pay. So with FiSpan, it's going to be most of the top banks. So they're constantly rolling out banks. They've got, I don't know, 16, 17 last I looked, that they work with. Um, the really benefit of FiSpan is it push payments out for most of those banks. And the payment rails do vary by bank, but most banks do at a minimum checks, ACH, and wires. And so this really allows you to kind of centralize the end-to-end process of, receiving that bill, paying that bill, all within Sage Intacct, very securely. And so we do have a webinar scheduled in August with FiSpan, so be on the lookout for that. Access Pay is another great direct connection provider. While they don't allow you to push payments out, it's a great way to securely and safely get transactions in. So they're going to leverage the Swift network or the an SFTP process and consume, a BAI2 file. And so there is always a cost with Access Pay. It depends on the connection and the number of accounts. With FiSpan, it can kind of go back and depend on the bank and your relationship with the bank. So if you're struggling with kind of that plaid or that indirect connection, this is where to look next. And then finally, we have the custom accounts. And I actually, sorry, Dave, I don't have a slide for this.
Okay.
I
All
meant
right.
to put one in here. This is where we can work with Sage on your behalf and build a custom integration between the bank and Sage Intacct. It's a really robust solution, but it's also going to be the most expensive solution. Okay, so that's how we get transactions in. What happens when the transaction lands? The first thing that happens is we've got matching rules, which fire, and then we have create rules, and then we'll talk about rule sets, which group up those matching and create rules together. So a match rule does just what it sounds like. It's going to determine how to automatically match transactions from the bank feed or that import you've loaded to the bank, right? Because that's kind of the goal of we want our clients to get to, or most of our clients are getting to a daily cash rec. So those bank transactions get imported, the match rule fires, and you're kind of left with things that aren't in the system. Just one note, I think for a lot of you, if you're setting up those matching rules for the first time on a new bank account, those rules don't fire until you open a bank rec. We run into that a lot. So after your match rules fire and you've matched what you can, and those match rules can be one-to-one, Intacct to the bank. They can be many Intacct transactions to one transaction in the bank, or they can be one transaction in Intacct to many in the bank potentially. So you can do some grouping. So after it's figured out the matches, your create rules fire. And so these are going to automatically create journal entries or credit card transactions. Right now, it's limited to those two things based on the bank description and a template. And those can either be posted in draft or go right to the books, depending on how comfortable you are. And so match rules fire, do as much as they can. Then your create rules fire, great use cases for this are sweep accounts, dividends, interest expense, maybe utility bills that are just hitting your account, auto drafting that you might not have a bill for. So the next step, you get your match rules going, your create rules going, and you put them in rule sets. And so these rule sets really are going to just group the matching and create rules. And then you assign these, set of rules to accounts. So, if we did your implementation, we typically kind of have created one rule set for all accounts. So you might see that. But if you're ready to kind of add more, create rules, refine your matching rules, please reach out. We'll help you with that. And you can even have, one rule set by entity, one rule set by bank account, if that's needed. So moving on, just to kind of a recap of kind of the step is you're going to create your rules, you add those rules to a rule set, you add accounts to that rule set, and then you run that rule set, and then you're able to actually see how these rules fire and the results with a kind of a rule set report. If you think something should be firing and it's not, that's a great place to start. And then you refine, right? So most of our customers have somebody that comes in, and if you've got live bank transactions going, the first thing they do is they review those unmatched transactions. Maybe I should match those to something, maybe a customer payment came in or a bill that we forgot to mark as paid. We need to do that. Or maybe I need to do a create rule. And we found after like several months of kind of refining your match rules and refining those create rules, you get down to very few daily transactions that you need to manage. And so I think really the goal is that daily cash rec. So when you look at your book balance, it's going to be as close to that bank balance as possible. So then moving on, the most recent, I guess, functionality here is customer assignment rules. And so these customer assignment rules are going to allow you to look at unmatched deposits and look at that description and figure out the customer based on that description, and then assign a customer based on that description. And after you know that customer, there's a step to go ahead and apply that payment coming in to an invoice, right? So you've got several kind of options there. You can apply it to your oldest first, the earliest first, the smallest or the largest amount. So really, this workflow is you create those assignment rules to figure out the customers. You can always manually apply that customer on the fly if that customer doesn't have a consistent description. Once you know the customers, you're going to select the deposits that you want to apply to open AR invoices, select that payment application method, and apply the payments manually. So without having to leave your bank transaction screen, you're able to kind of hopefully apply open payments across the board to all your open invoices. And here's just a really, simple screenshot of, how easy it is. You assign the customers and you receive the payment. So if you want to talk about this, if you think this is valuable, please reach out. And so I think that was it. So, hopefully, you got a few tidbits. Like I said, if you see something you liked, let's connect. Feel free to reach out to me, anybody on the team. But that's it. If there's any Q&A or chat,
Yeah, so
comments,
we
Dave, we
have
can take a look at those.
yeah, we have one question that came in, and if anybody has any more, now's the time. Get those dropped in the Q&A or in the chat. We'll pick those up. But we have one so far from Grant here. He says, "Is the finance intelligence agent connected to Claude or ChatGPT enterprise models? If not, is this a Sage Intacct AI model? Security, is this a closed loop model for data privacy?" So this is I would say, Grant, this is similar. The finance intelligence agent is sort of embedded, an embedded AI agent that's like Claude or like ChatGPT. but it's not either one of those. It's a proprietary LLM that Sage has built. I think it's actually multiple LLMs and all the whatever the lingo is here that they built to perform the natural language queries and pull back the results. And then, like Lane said, show you how it got to those results so that you have real clear auditability and trust of what the logic was that it used to come up with that answer. It does respect all the security that you have. So the intelligence agent gets turned on, it gets assigned to users that are allowed to use it. And then based on their permissions, it only is going to be able to see and reply with things that that user is allowed to see and know about. Um, and so, and it's inside the system. So there's kind of no external connection to it. Now, as it relates to Claude and ChatGPT, there is an MCP server connection called the AI Gateway, where you can give if you and if you have web services access and the AI Gateway access, you can give that that connection to Claude, to ChatGPT, to Gemini, to whatever external AI model you're using, and it can connect and pull back data and pull back. You can query the system through that as well. And I think we went over this some in our AI webinar a couple of weeks ago, and that's out on our YouTube channel if you want to watch that back.
Yeah, and I'll just add, your data is not used to train anyone else's AI model. So your Intacct instance has its own model. They're not, like your data isn't being used to train somebody else's Intacct finance intelligent agent, if that makes sense.
Okay. I didn't see any other questions. I think one thought I had just as we were talking through the banking, just if anybody has any questions there. I think it's one of those things where each individual one of those transactions is a pretty small thing to record an entry or to book interest income. But then if you just think about kind of how many times you have to do that in a year, how many bank accounts you have on top of that, and you kind of multiply that out, it ends up being real time that can just be removed, right? And then on top of that, there's no rekeying, there's no everything's a lot more reliable and just makes things, once you get it set up, it just makes things a lot easier. So I know looking at the responses to some of the questions on the signups, it seemed like everybody's in different spots here, and so definitely reach out to Lane and team if you feel like you want to dig in a little bit more on your individual position and maybe see if there's some things that can be done to speed up your day. So with that, I think we'll let everybody go, and we'll see you next quarter. We're planning on doing these release updates every quarter, and then stay tuned. We're actually trying to have something like this every month, and so I think we have something planned for July, working on July and August for sure. So we'll have something coming out soon to kind of update you on those things, and looking forward to talking to you all real soon. So thanks so much.
Yep. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Dave.